This is an LA CTO Forum production.
Welcome to Exception Handlers, the podcast where CTOs debug the challenges that keep us up at night. I'm Alex.
And I'm Bill.
And on today's episode, we have with us Dan Grosh, Managing Director at Fleming Martin, who's going to talk to us about recruiting, CTO careers, and a bunch of other topics. But before we get into that, Dan, do you want to say a few things about yourself?
Well, it's wonderful to be here. I've been a headhunter for my whole career. So I moved out to the Bay Area in 1995, fell in love with recruiting. Initially, I was recruiting Fortran engineers. So I was placing them as contractors, and then that morphed to on-site work, where I became a contract recruiter for some of the most innovative tech companies pre-dot-com boom and bust. Then I decided to become an executive recruiter and worked with an individual that was a top biller at Korn Ferry, the very, very top biller, and worked for his firm, and then worked for Boyd & Global, which is a top 10 executive search firm. Was part of Caliber One, where I was the U.S. managing partner, and we significantly increased the revenues of that business. It's a transatlantic boutique search firm. And then I decided to go in-house and work at Diversis Capital, an LA-based private equity firm that focused on enterprise software and tech-enabled services investments, lower mid-market private equity firm with about 2 billion AUM under assets. Finally, before Fleming Martin, I was part of a large firm called True, the sixth largest executive search firm, where I was a managing director. And now I'm here at Fleming Martin with my two very close friends, Marty and Fleming, running the business with them.
Wow. I mean, that's, first of all, very impressive background. And secondly, you're the perfect person to talk to about the topics we're going to discuss today. And just to start off, so obviously you're kind of at the nexus of boards and CEOs and technical leaders looking for CTOs during a very rapidly changing time, right? We're living through a lot of stuff kind of simultaneously. So I guess from your perspective, how has the market evolved for CTOs, and what are some of the less obvious things about how that's evolving and what people are looking for in CTOs?
Well, the obvious thing is everything around AI. And so my counsel would be get into it, embrace it, learn it, love it. So if you're not working with all the tools that are out there, Replit, Claude, you name it, Cursor, get into it. And again, develop a passion for AI, because it's here and it's here to stay. It might go through a couple of different evolutions, but we've seen different cycles where something's a little bit ahead of its time, flattens out a little bit, and then it comes back. Well, I think AI is certainly one of those. And so those that, again, can embrace AI for productivity, for code improvement, for making your teams most efficient, I think, again, it's time to really embrace this. So I'd say that first and foremost. I think in terms of surprises, there isn't anything really significant that I would describe as a new surprise in the market. I would say that it depends on the sectors and the subsectors. Some are really hot, some are not. It is a bit of a choppy market right now. And so, again, depending on where you sit, if you're sitting in again, AI, if you're sitting in cyber, if you're sitting in, GRC, if you're sitting in a couple of really hot areas right now, it could be very compelling.
So along those lines, we see AI right now is really hard to define on a number of levels. And part of that is because it is changing so quickly. It got very wide, and in the applicability of it is incredibly diverse out there right now. So what are you seeing right now are kind of the key thresholds when you bring in somebody or somebody's being evaluated and it's they know AI, or they're comfortable with AI, or they not? Is it more functionally oriented? Is it a broad background across tools? Is it fundamental knowledge versus applied knowledge? Where's kind of the balance you see that's kind of registering for someone's able to check the box that I'm an AI oriented CTO?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all the above. And so in an ideal world, you're looking for somebody who's has the strategic leadership and vision, so they can build the roadmap, they can implement the plans, they can work alongside corporate strategy. They know how to integrate AI use cases. And so they can really lead the design, the development, deployment of AI-enabled systems to improve the things that we were talking about: operational efficiency, quality, throughput, customer experience, the really the full gamut. In addition to that, I think somebody should definitely be fluent in terms of some of the risks and governance around AI. So what does responsible AI look like? What do the ethical AI principles look like for privacy and security, et cetera? And then, somebody who ideally has built and scaled an AI team before, data scientists, ML, for deployment engineers, product managers, ML ops, et cetera, et cetera. And then, who's out there in terms of at the forefront, in terms of, working with the different frameworks, working with the right partnerships, developing the right KPIs and success metrics to evaluate, AI initiative outcomes.
So what's interesting. Well, first I'll say, I was hoping that this interview would be the first one since we started this podcast that does not get into AI. Clearly, that has not happened.
Good luck.
It is an unavoidable topic, no matter what else you're talking about. But you've mentioned a bunch of stuff which kind of a cynic would take a look at and say, not only are the companies redefining the CTO role in a very meaningful way, they're really piling on a lot of stuff onto that role that maybe wasn't traditionally the responsibility of CTO. So, just to point out a couple of things, the idea that not only do you need to understand how product can benefit from AI and guide that, you now need to understand how your enterprise can benefit from AI and guide that, which is arguably an entirely different, almost a CIO type responsibility. On top of that, being aware of the risks and kind of compliance issues related to AI, which is traditionally not a CTO responsibility, right? Or maybe compliance, security type CISO stuff, maybe something else. I guess, are you seeing this? Is this a reasonable way to see this and to kind of look at what's happening?
Yeah, and I think what you're going to see in the future, and you'll hear it from other search practitioners as well, is the combination of a CIO, CTO, or a CPTO, which is becoming more and more common. So, product and technology is all under one organization, under one umbrella. And again, you're seeing a lot of those roles combined. And I think with AI in the mix, you're going to see more and more of that trend.
Well, and I think to some extent, we're also going to be seeing some level of widespread tutorship or tutelage in how to use AI. I mean, functionally, I see out in the world in the CTO forum where we're doing stuff today, I see two basic groups. There's the people who are deep into AI, and there's the people who are wide into AI. And the deep people are down trying to do things which may be cutting edge, applying it, et cetera, doing testing. And the wide people tend to be like, I've got 75 people I have to bring up to speed to be able to use these tools correctly. And so we're not wasting money on top of it, and we can really leverage their skill sets. And it sounds like there's almost two completely different camps out there that need to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, again, it really continues to evolve, and something that we discovered, actually, we host HR roundtables, talent roundtables, operating partner roundtables, and we heard this universally in terms of how companies are adapting, how their environments are adapting, who's leading AI. And what we found is that right now it's a bit of a mix, but cross-functionally bringing all different departments, all different functions into the fray is critically important, where there is that communication, there is that cross-functional integration that is being done to embrace AI. But in terms of going deeper wide, I think that's a little bit to be determined in terms of where this goes, because it's evolving so fast.
And so I guess to that end, is it then a little too early to tell, what is the CTO profile that will best succeed in this new world? Or is it becoming so, to Bill's point, right? You've got the nerds, the AI really in the weeds, understand, especially from a product perspective, right? How to best integrate it into the product line and make maximum use of it. And then you've got more of the sort of pragmatic practitioners. How do you get the enterprise to adopt it? How do you get your engineering teams, your product teams, your finance and sales and operations teams to leverage better? Is there one or the other that's kind of emerging as more valuable, or is it too early to tell?
I'd say it's too early to say. I mean, you definitely need the conductors, right? The strategists. And then you also need the grinders, those that are in the weeds, that are super tactical, that are deploying this every day. But you really do need, in my opinion, a balance of both.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Of course, adding another axis to this rather difficult minefield to walk is the emergence of these kind of product-y, techie people, where the CPO and the CTO are having larger and larger overlap of who's doing what.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I mentioned in terms of CPTO,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That role. What I will say is, a lot of the engagements that I've taken on in AI, and even in the past, when the role was more like director of data science or VP of machine learning, it was product disposition that was really important, that the companies were looking for, that somebody came from product management discipline. They definitely had to have engineering in their background, but they really, again, needed to be the conductor of the product. So they had to be able to articulate value with AI. And that, again, comes from the world of product.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about everybody's most and least favorite topics, which is comp, negotiations of comp, and all the componentry of that. And so maybe to start off with, I think you mentioned in a recent conversation that the kind of cash component of the compensation seems to have stalled out or has been relatively flat, but other parts of it, equity and such, are changing in potentially creative ways. I would love to hear a little bit more about that from your perspective.
Yeah, so what we've generally seen is merit increases over the last couple of years of like 2 to 3 to 4% or so. Again, in some roles, in some particular roles, that is significantly higher. And so that includes AI. That also, what we've seen and what I experienced in the private equity firm is a significant increase in finance compensation as well. So for finance officers that are really strong on both buy side and sell side M&A, there was a pretty significant jump in terms of not only cash but also in equity. What we're seeing in terms of trends on equity, and this is not for every company, but it's just, again, some of the trends that we're seeing, is a shorter equity vesting schedule. And so what we've heard from some really hot companies is going from the typical 4-year, first year 25% cliff, and then 136 thereafter, to a 40-30-30 structure. And in that first year, it's not a 1-year cliff. It vests 25% of that 40% every quarter. What that's doing, though, at the same time, is the investors that we've spoken with are understandably quite nervous with that structure, because one, from a parity standpoint, from an equality standpoint, if you're only giving this to a few people, it can absolutely mess up, again, from a parity standpoint, as well as a cap table, in terms of if somebody's prematurely bailing and not sticking with the company after a year, within a year, then again, that can really affect the cap table and the waterfall.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It just seems like at a time when things are so frenetic and changing so quickly. I mean, one of the examples I like to point to is a year ago, there was no Claude Code. Having someone who understands that it is kind of leading the march forward and bringing it together so it brings value to the company, be on a shorter, not that I disagree, but be on a shorter track to earn equity, and increasing the possibility that they could leave seems to be quite risky, actually.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly risky. And again, it's a certain number, it's a handful of companies that we work with are either contemplating or starting to do this right now. And it's across the board. You see it in venture, private equity, and even in some public, in terms of how they're granting RSUs.
And just to be clear, what's driving this other than sort of the obvious talent wars that you normally see? Is there some other thing going on here that is kind of counterintuitive? Because to us, Bill and I are both probably have been in this world for a long time. This sounds genuinely surprising, and I'm curious, what is driving this?
Yeah, well, it's definitely the demand for talent and the unknown with AI that's really driving this right now. And there is this trend, just because the market, is choppy. You hear of like the job hugging phenomenon, right? This isn't necessarily helping the job huggers per se, but it is, again, in terms of attracting and retaining the hottest of AI talent is really what's driving this.
And along those lines, it's what it sounds like is if whatever the threshold is to be an AI CTO, if you meet it for that company, they're going to aggressively pursue you because apparently there's not a lot of people meeting that threshold.
Yeah, that's correct. And so, again, what we've heard repeatedly is it's, again, for a very, very select pool that those concessions are being made. It hasn't necessarily been universally deployed across the company.
By the way, you mentioned job hugging, which I find a very amusing term. Could you just define it for our audience? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it's somebody that I would describe as not very happy in their role. They're not inspired, right? And so the drive is not there. But at the same time, it is a tricky market to navigate. And if they don't have a very unique skill set, it is a tough market out there for, again, a number of functions. And so if you're not the elite of the elite or have a very, very unique skill set within AI, it is a tough market out there.
Yeah.
So
yeah. That makes sense. I also wanted to just ask, given all that's going on in kind of the evolving landscape around equity potentially, so if you're a CTO who's evaluating offers, what's the right way to think about what you have in front of you, how much credence to give to the base versus potential for equity? And related to all that, like, what's the biggest mistake you see people make when they do those evaluations?
Yeah, so I would describe this as a whole, and again, I'm being a bit of a generalist when it comes to or generalization across venture, private equity, and public. But I would say that they're all part of the quan, so to speak, right? You heard that term in Jerry Maguire, right? And so, certainly if you're living in a high cost area, the base is critically important. That there's from a parity standpoint, you're not below market for the next role, and that you want to be in line with compensations at your level. I would say on the bonus just needs to be realistic. And so, whether it's 25, 30%, 50%, the company performance targets, you're pretty sure that the company is going to hit its targets. And usually those are around operating metrics, EBITDA, company growth, churn, CAC, et cetera. But you want to make sure, again, if you're in line for a bonus, and some of that's going to be directly tied to your own personal MBOs as well in terms of your performance, but it's going to be a mix of company as well as personal performance. But you want to make sure that the company is carrying its weight of the equation, right, and doing what it's going to do, doing what it's saying it's going to do, and so they're saying A and doing A.
But just to follow up on that, when the company is selling you upside, what kinds of questions should an experienced CTO be asking that most people are either too polite or too inexperienced or too shy to ask? What should you be really digging into?
Yeah, so my future peers or my potential future peers, have they hit their bonus? And why or why not? So where did they fall short? Specifically, where did the company fall short? So again, you separate it out, but you can ask, a little bit tougher to ask about a personal exec in terms of their targets, but definitely easier to ask, okay, so have bonuses been paid out for ELT and for the rest of the staff, generally speaking? Why or why not? What's fallen short? If it's fallen short, how are you going to get there? How are you going to make sure that we're meeting the bonus metrics? So I think you just ask it straight up and straight out, and so and again, it can lead to other questions. So if this is a cash flow issue or an EBITDA issue, well, Why has that happened in the company? If it's, a sales issue, why hasn't there been higher conversion? Or, is the lead pipeline not good, or is the product terrible? I mean, so it can lead to a lot of different questions, but I think you start there in terms of, simply, have you hit the bonus and why, or why not?
And maybe just a little bit more on bonus aside, when companies talk about equity and the potential for sort of life-changing value to come out of that, in your experience, how realistic is that? Is it
Well, the
mostly
life-changing, the life-changing value is really going to come out of the equity, not out of the base bonus.
Surely, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. And so, getting to equity now. So, equity has changed a little bit from, percentage base, where the percentages were really critical. Now it's really about what is the value? What is the ultimate value of, of the equity? If the company 2X's over 2 years, or over 4 years, or 4X's, what is that cash value amount? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And so, because you could get a very large percentage in a small company that doesn't really go anywhere, or 1X's, versus a smaller percentage in a larger company that 5X's, and your percentage, your equity value is going to be significantly higher in the latter scenario. So again, it's really about, one, understanding what parity is, again, in the market. And you do, generally speaking, want to be within those, parameters that you'll see on some of the comp studies. But the comp studies are changing too and evolving. And again, everything is moving quickly in terms of how the market is shifting. At the same time, I would say that, generally speaking, equity percentages have pretty much remained constant, whether, again, it's in a larger company or a smaller company.
Okay. I again want to switch gears and talk about what I think a lot of people who go through this process struggle with, which is, how do you stand out as a candidate? You've probably seen tons of CTOs and their stories. What separates the memorable candidates from just the merely competent ones? How do you stand out?
Yeah, so first I'll share something that comes from Lee Hecht Harrison. They are one of the very best outplacement firms in the world. And they have an acronym called SOAR, which stands for Situation, Obstacle, Action, Result. And I think those that have the ability to tell a great, concise, but impactful, they're able to craft impactful stories about their experience, definitely stand out for those that speak as if they're reading off their resume and it just sounds like a job description. That doesn't describe how they've increased value for the company, how they've made the company money, how they've saved that money, how they've significantly improved productivity, or how they've improved the people around them, their lives. And so those that are exceptional that I see, one, have great SOAR stories. They also have great war stories. So, in terms of what is the problem that they solved for that company? What were some of the biggest barriers, in the company's history that they had to come in and solve with their team on their own, where, again, it was an absolute disaster, and they had to flip this thing. And sometimes it's not always about flipping. It's not always about transformation or turnarounds, but how did they go through significant scale in a very, very tough market where there were a lot of competitors, but yet where there was significant value proposition that they were able to bring out, either as a product exec, as a tech exec, as a sales exec, as a marketing exec. It really doesn't matter, but where did they really have an impact on the product, on the vision, on the mission, on the people? And so it's those that can best articulate, and those that can show, a drive, a hunger, a curiosity, grit, Angela Duckworth put out a book regarding grit, which I think is one of the best books that is out there on management. And it's really about, again, those that have incredible success stories, and that those that handle adversity the best. I would also say those that show EQ and IQ. So there is a self-awareness, because the worst candidates that I've seen show no self-awareness. They talk too long. They don't pay attention in interviews. It's all about me, I, ego. They don't ask, curious questions. They're not inquisitive. It's more about the money or about, the exit than it is about the journey. And so, you can really, really stand out by being, highly inquisitive and show curiosity in interviews.
So along those lines, and clearly, I mean, I agree 100% with what you're saying there, because in anything, when you're talking to somebody who has a good EQ, IQ balance, it's much more interesting. For those who are not so gifted naturally, is there suggestions that you have that could help people, like, where do I go to learn how to do these kinds of things, or to make sure I'm ticking the boxes that show that I'm adding the value properly? Because today I think the answer is you work with AI and it barfs something out, and if you read it robotically, you're not doing well, obviously. But in terms of trying to make sure that you come off as someone who is adding value on this multidimensional kind of checklist, is there any suggestions on how to improve?
Yeah, I mean, so one, I think 360s are important in terms of that feedback from past bosses, past peers, past subordinates, customers, channels, peers of industry. And so, by running, a 360 on yourself, if it's not part of a formal process, I think is something that, I would strongly, strongly advise. Getting an executive coach, I've seen be incredibly impactful for executives by having the wherewithal and the willingness to get personal coaching, even at this level. I think shows a lot of EQ, frankly, in terms of again, the willingness to grow and learn, and then the continuous learning process in terms of evolving, right? Never staying stagnant. Reaching, right? Being the best that you can possibly be, the best version of yourself. And so that includes, also fitness, right? Being in shape, being positive, neurolinguistics, again, self-help. I mean, just all the above, right? Is really, I think it's an all-encompassing process in terms of being the best version of yourself.
And actually, just to follow up on that, obviously, in your role, you work with CTOs, I imagine, and help them potentially become the best version of themselves. Can you talk a little bit about what a CTO would be expecting from a recruiter or a headhunter that they're working with on a?
Yeah, so our role is we are matchmakers. I think of myself as, it's like dating, and so we're here to. We're like the this version of Match.com or JDate or I'm not even familiar with the ones that are out there, but essentially we're looking for a perfect match, and so, or an ideal match, and so it's not just about representing the candidate, but also representing our clients as well, and ensuring that the candidates meet the parameters around compatibility, chemistry, competency, and compensation. That's also from Lee Hecht Harrison, the 4 C's. So, what we can be helpful as connectors on roles that we are maybe not working on at this particular time, but really we're most helpful on the roles in which we do have an active engagement. And
but in terms of like self-improvement, so is it fair to say that you might be able to polish off a few rough edges just to make sure there is a really clean fit, but you wouldn't be the one to look to actually help the CTOs do better at telling their story, being inquisitive, being engaged in the conversation? That's not really where you focus. Is that fair?
Well, it absolutely is in terms of, coaching them, but not over coaching them in the interview, because we want them to be natural. But we will certainly give them cues in terms of, here is what the client is looking for. They're not only looking for these skill sets, but they're looking for these attributes. And then in a way, it's up to that candidate to, pay attention to the cues that we're giving them. But we do not want to overcoach them, because if they get in there and we've overcoached them and they get in there and they fail, then that's bad for everyone, right? And so again, we want somebody to operate, so to speak, in their natural habitat. But if somebody is asking me for coaching, and I halfway to my coaching certification, executive coaching certification, and I do coach. If somebody is asking for that and they've come through a very, very warm source, and I trust that source, and it's somebody that I want to work with, then I will certainly work with them. Whether it's, again, resume coaching, how to best present themselves, talk about, again, the source stories. I also have other resources that we're connected to that are professionals in that space as well, that do, again, resume coaching, career coaching, etc.
Makes sense. So I want to close this by asking you a kind of a future facing question. So, 5 years from now, how do you see the CTO job evolve? You've mentioned a couple of things already, but I wonder if you have a more sort of comprehensive perspective on this. What will matter more than people think today? What will matter less? How do you see this going?
So a caveat, I will say I'm probably the worst predictor of technology trends, or where the market is.
Well, we know some doozies. I'm not sure about that.
So, again, I say this with a strong caveat in terms of, what will the CTO look like in 5 years? I think there are some real key pillars that will continue to remain in this market. So security, I think, cyber is certainly not going away, and we're seeing a strengthening in cybersecurity companies, whereas the rest of SaaS is in a bit of an inflection point. But I think the CTO who is incredibly well-rounded in governance and almost operates like a CISO, will position themselves definitely for the future. I think, again, AI, in 5 years will have probably evolved significantly, and so those that have really developed the skills and have embraced AI and are using it prolifically, and are the conductor and have built some really neat things, I think will position themselves for the future as well. It will be interesting to see how much offshoring changes in the world of AI. And so I'm going to put that out there as a TBD. I mean, I will say, a couple of years ago, even more than a couple of years ago, the global piece was really important in terms of being able to run offshoring teams. It will be interesting to see, again, how things evolve. I would say, the other trend to watch is fractional, to see if fractional emerges more and more, if there's a little bit more flexibility in the workplace. I know, things have come back in terms of, wanting to get everybody in the office these days, and that might balance out where there is a true hybrid form there. But I think somebody who can manage it all, like they've they're versatile, so they've been able to manage offshore, they've been able to manage virtual, they've been able to definitely do on-site in terms of building a culture. And then the last thing I would say is the commercially oriented CTO. So that, we're seeing just more and more trends in terms of those that, again, have a bit, and we're seeing it with chief product officers too, in terms of the sales and marketing mind. And so those that are able to, be truly commercially facing CTOs, I think will position themselves really well for the future.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic answer.
Yeah, and it kind of loops back around to what you were talking about in the beginning, and this kind of well-rounded, multi-talented, multi-skilled person. What I always find to be an interesting dichotomy of needs is at the same time the world is looking for somebody who's good at tech, good at security, understands programming, and can teach people how to do stuff. We only want you part-time. That's just from experience. That's a lot to juggle 2 days a week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's to get what people want, in my opinion, they want somebody who gets up in the morning and is already thinking about the things that are going to affect the day at the office. And fractional doesn't fit that, in my opinion. There's many cases where fractional is perfectly acceptable. But in this case where they're looking for these uber CTOs to solve these problems, and I think you're 100% right on the security side. You just look at all the clod butt stuff out there where all of a sudden people are introducing hundreds to thousands of different external dependencies, and there isn't a lot of thought about the security ramifications of that. That's going to come home to roost again and bigger, and I think that's going to put another big crosshair on the CISO type relationship they have.
Yeah. And I guess we'll see, right? We'll see. We'll see. Hopefully, we'll be back here together in 5 years to see if our predictions were on the mark.
It's a date. We will definitely do that.
But I will say, the closing thought, though. I mean, ultimately, we're in the people business, and so ultimately, this comes down to people. And so, how people manage those dynamics, how they grow careers, how they get the very, very best out of their engineers, right? Out of their analysts, out of their project managers, out of their support group. And so, ultimately, it's those that again can have the drive, the EQ, the wherewithal, and the credibility with engineers, and they've just built an incredible crack team. They get the best with the most, whether that is again AI or no AI, but they get the very, very best out of their team, and those are the ones that again I find to be exceptional. Whether it's small teams, they're able to work with really lean teams, but again get the very most. There's very low turnover, it's high morale. They have a really strong, core in terms of integrity, because you absolutely have to lead with integrity. And so, but those are the ones that, again, I think from a people standpoint, those are the ones that are always going to win, or those that are the very, very best, and they get the most out of their people.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, Dan, this was excellent. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you being here. Incredible insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, really enjoyed.
Awesome. Well, if you found this conversation interesting or relevant to you, LA CTO Forum has lots of opportunities to engage with other CTOs on topics just like this one. If you're interested in learning more, find us on LinkedIn or on the web at lactoforum.org. Until next time, may your deployments be smooth and your tech debt manageable.
And remember, if you can't handle the exception, at least log it properly. We'll catch you next time.